Don't have my thing up. There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live chill stream. Happy Monday to all of you. Hope everybody had a great weekend. And it's great to be with you today. We're going to do a different subject, which is Melito of Sardis. We're going to do deep dive on the canon. So specifically Melito of Sardis, who's very, very important piece of evidence for the Protestant canon, and one that I've done quite a bit of research on. So we're going to take our time. We're going to go through Melito, and I'm going to show you how Melito of Sardis really isn't a good candidate for the Protestant canon. So anyway, welcome aboard, everybody. It's great to have you with us today. And just want to remind you guys, if you haven't subscribed, please do. Like, hit the bell, that type of stuff. Also, we got memberships as well. I'm working on, actually, we're going to talk about one of the members only thing, Patreon only videos I'm going to do is I'm going to do a reception of the Book of Enoch. We've had a few questions here on the chill streams concerning First Enoch, and I thought, you know what, we really haven't done anything on that. You know, I haven't focused on Enoch alone. So I just want to go through the history of the reception of Enoch. So that video is going to come out for members, hopefully by the end of the week. Sorry, I'm trying to do some housekeeping stuff over here while I'm live streaming. So hopefully that'll be coming up soon for members. So if you have a membership, thank you so much. God bless, and you're going to love it. I think at least they'll clarify. I'm going to put all the information about Enoch, historically speaking, up, and you can make the decision whether Enoch is canonical, what's the reception, because it's very interesting when you do it chronologically. All right, welcome aboard. Morning, Susan. You're up early today. And wow, is that a super chat already? All right, thank you so much. God bless you. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's the morning live stream. It's a chill session. I'm talking very softly because over here in Michigan, it's 4:42 a.m. So my family's sleeping. So yes, good morning to you as well. Gentle Warrior. Yes. Salam al-Masih. Joey. Great to have everybody on board. For the people that don't sleep or get up incredibly early, what a better way to start off your day than talk about Melito Sardis. Boy, there are a lot of nerds out there. So, all right. Let's see. I'm trying to get everything. If you want to come up and discuss Melito Sardis or anything with the canon, please click the link that is pinned in the message area. Awesome, Joey Esto. Thank you. That's awesome. 5 gifted Apocalypse memberships. That is so awesome. And okay, it's a party. We got James Divine Mercy Apologetics in the house. Is it morning or is it evening? Who's paying attention to anything? Yeah, I know. It seems like it, doesn't it? But like I said, it's always a party, James, when you're in the house. If you want to come up, you can. I don't want to pressure you. You got things to do. But you mentioned Melito Sardis, so I'm bringing it to you, James. This is for you. Talk about this very early church father. Since we've done away with Josephus, I think there's no way Josephus can be given a canon. If you believe otherwise, by the way, hit that link, which, let's see, it'll be, yeah, it's over here, I think, on your YouTube screen. Come up and discuss it. We could do Josephus, but we're going to talk about the next earliest canon list. And this one actually is a list, unlike Josephus. We're going to talk about Melito Sardis' list. Since it's so early, around 8180, 170, somewhere around there, It's the next biggest witness for the Protestant Old Testament canon. Therefore, it's very, very important, especially when you have Josephus out of the way, right? So this would be the earliest list ever. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to knock the stuffing out of that. By the way, I did an in-depth discussion of this, I think, with William Albrecht. I can't remember if David was on. We were on Sam Shamoon's show. And just go to Shamoonian and type in the chat room Melito or Anthony Rogers, because Anthony Rogers put out a academic level paper on Melito Sardis and whether or not he has the Deuterocanonical Book of Wisdom on his list. Yes, Melito does have the wisdom on there. And so we were invited by Sam to come up, and I did a huge deep dive with Sam. So we're going to use some material from that. I'm going to also use some material from another academic paper I've been working on. And we're going to bring it all together for our brother James. By the way, Divine Mercy Apologetics, if you haven't subscribed to it, if you haven't checked it out, you need to, because you love deep dives into early church Christology, Trinitarian theology, a lot of other things as well. Some really cool discussions as well. You got to check out his channel, because brother's doing phenomenal work. And let's see. Okay, yes, I do have everything pinned up. We are about to get the show on the road. Again, it's the chill stream, so forgive me for not shouting or being too loud. My daughter's asleep in the next room. I don't want to wake her up. So everything looks good. Everybody's on board. Hey, we got 18 people watching at this hour in the morning. That's beautiful. So let's dive into Melito Sardis. And again, anybody wants to come on board, have a discussion with me on the canon or Melito Sardis, the link is pinned at the top of the chat room. And yeah, man, we're ready to roll. Start off Monday on a good foot. So I don't know if we'll be able to get through everything today. We'll have to do a two-parter, which means Wednesday will be the next chill stream. And actually, the reason I was a little late today was I was finishing up the PowerPoint slides. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have to follow up on this Wednesday, roughly about the same time as today. Okay, so a couple of facts for those who aren't familiar with Melito's list. And we're going to go over this, so you'll see these facts borne out. First, one thing to realize is that Melito's list is found only in a fragment in Eusebius's church history, book 4, chapter 26, if you want to look it up. We don't have the original work. It's lost. And all right. Hey, Chris, I'm honored that you did that. Thank you. Oh, so what am I going to do? So we only have the fragment in Eusebius. So we don't have a lot to go on. Also, the only complete work we have from Melito is his work on the Passover. That's it. We have little snippets, little fragments found in the early church father that quote Melito, but the only other work we have is from On the Passover, which is a homily. So this is important because we don't have a lot of material from Melito Sardis. We have very, very little. So that means to understand his list, we really need to import as much surrounding context and information as we can to get a handle on what exactly is going on in his list. Um, and that's what we're going to do on this live stream. I'm going to try to bring as much as we know, little itty bitty pieces of information. I'm going to bring it all to the fore and see if we can construct some sort of picture of what exactly is going on with Melito Sardis, why he's doing the list, what's the purpose of the list, who is Melito Sardis, who is Onesimus, all that good stuff. So and unfortunately, since there's no other complete works that we have that have survived the ages from Melito, we can't look at his usage. Okay. Which is a shame because that would help out tremendously, but we're very limited on that. We also know that this list is found at the beginning of a book called Extracts. The work is done at the request of Onesimus. It contains quotes. The book Extracts is basically a book of quotes. It's quotes from specifically the Law and the Prophets. So it is a list of quotes exclusively from the Old Testament, which is an important piece of data. Melito also wished the list to be accurate in number and order, so he traveled to the east to the place where these things were preached and practiced. Another interesting feature of Melito's list, even though Protestants often cite Melito Sardis in support of the Protestant canon, Melito's list actually omits the proto-canonical book of Esther. So you have to ask yourself, how in the world can it be cited as support for the Protestant canon, which includes Esther, when it itself omits Esther? Another interesting feature of Melito Sardis, and I think we're going to probably talk about that Wednesday, is that he also says he lists the Proverbs of Solomon and his wisdom. And there's a lot of discussion as to what exactly is he citing. Is he citing an alternative title for Proverbs, namely wisdom or the all virtuous wisdom? Or is he actually including a deuterocanonical book? That's very interesting. So that's another feature. Yeah, good morning, Apostolic Kingdom. Yep. It's night wherever you are, so I'm glad you're joining a late night session. This is the early morning chill stream for me. And so we're going to talk about that. And also another feature too is depending on whether you include wisdom as an alternative title for Proverbs or as a different book like the Wisdom of Solomon or Sirach, okay, that will affect how many titles he actually gives in his list. Because if wisdom is the same as Proverbs, if you count all his titles, you come up with 21 titles. If it's a separate book, you come up with 22 titles. Okay. Now, since this actually is a canon list, that may signal that he's reproducing the rabbinic collection of scripture, because 22 is later on in history an important number. Okay, just throwing it out there. Not saying it is, just throwing out there that if it's a separate title, then we have 22. If it's not, it's 21. But 21 is an odd number for a list of Old Testament books. By the way, if you have any questions, please throw them up on the chat room. If you want to come join me, the link is up there on YouTube. I have it pinned. Okay, so who is Melito Sardis? We only know about him through other church fathers. Just to put him historically, like how he fits in overall, Melito Sardis is a contemporary of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who reigned from 161 to 180 AD. And we know through the church fathers that Melito Sardis had penned, according to Jerome, he dedicated a defense of Christianity to this emperor. Okay, so that's how we know that's where he is. And it's interesting that he's an apologist. After all, this is the age of the apologist, the second Christian century. He writes a defense of Christianity against for this pagan emperor. Okay. He also lived around the ascension of Judah the Prince, also known as Yehuda Hanasi, who is the patriarch. And this is actually pretty important. And we'll talk about this maybe later this live stream. So in Jewish history, he's around the time of Judah the Prince. We also place his list right a few decades before the Mishnah had reached its completion. So for those who aren't familiar, the Mishnah is in rabbinic literature a collection of oral tradition, and it becomes the core feature of really rabbinic literature, because the Talmuds, you have the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the commentary. That is what the Talmuds is. So the Mishnah is really at the very core of the Talmud. So that hasn't reached its completion by the time Melito of Sardis wrote this. I know this sounds very trivial, but I think it's actually very important to understand what's going on. Okay. So Melito of Sardis, when he's writing this list, was during a transitional page within, or a transition period within rabbinic Judaism, and is pretty chaotic, if you ask me. Okay. And then finally, of course, Melito is the bishop of Sardis. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is Sardis. It's actually an important biblical book, or place, I should say. And he gained a reputation for being a great light in the early church. So he's very well thought of as a bishop. Now let's see here. The Mishnah wasn't around for like 200 years. That's right. It was in development. Now I'm going to explain why it took so long for the Mishnah to come into its completed form, its full written form, but it's attributed. Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah, it develops. It develops. Judah the Prince is traditionally the guy who kind of puts the finishing touches. Hey, thank you. Appreciate that. As long as I get your thumbs up, my friend, I feel confident. In fact, it would be great to get your input when I get into rabbinic history. I'd like to see if you can help me. I actually wrote a paper. That would actually be a series of videos I could do, because I think that's very important in terms of the development of the canon, is what goes on in the Jewish history when we turn from the first century to the second Christian century, because I think that's really where rabbinic Judaism has its official text, its authoritative text, is the first quarter of the second Christian century. And I think what happens during that period is pivotal for understanding why Christians are making a list, and specifically Melito Sardis. So we'll have to do a couple of chill streams, maybe 2 or 3 into the future, just covering that period. Maybe I should have done it before Melito, but be that as it may. Okay. Another interesting fact that you don't see a lot, but you do see this in scholarly literature about Melito Sardis, and this is important, is that Melito seems to be a Jewish convert to Christianity. And this is from, I think it's Walber. He says, to our ears, Melito's attitude to the Jews is horrifying. In hearing what he has to say, we must recall the Jews were probably outnumbered Christians in Sardis, and that Melito himself was of Jewish stock. And I found this in a number of scholarly papers. They believe Melito was actually a Jewish convert. The evidence for that is thin, but then again, all our evidence concerning Melito is thin. So I just want to throw that out there, that he may be a convert. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. My family is coming from Jewish background, coming into Catholicism. That's beautiful. God bless you. Welcome home. Well, welcome to the fulfillment, the fullness of Judaism, I should say. Now let's talk about Sardis, okay? Because as it was mentioned, in Sardis at this time, chances are the Jewish community outnumbered the Christians, although the Christian community was quite ancient as far as Christianity goes. Why? Because in the book of Revelation, the angel addresses a letter to the church of Sardis in Revelation 3, verses 1 through 6. So this community was already established when the book of Revelation was made, which means that the Christians were very early converts, most likely because there was a large community. It's kind of hard to tell for the first century. It probably was composed of Jewish converts, probably Gentiles, so mixed congregation. Christians had been in Sardis since the first century. Sardis was also the home to a large Jewish community, probably outnumbered Christians, as we just saw, and he was likely a convert. I don't know why I have that redundant material in that slide. Interesting enough, like I said, the only surviving document that we have complete from Melito Sardis is his homily on the Passover. It's interesting how the Passover was so important for Christian Jewish polemics. After all, we're celebrating the Passover feast has been transformed in Christianity to the Mass, right? The Eucharist. And of course, Judaism is still holding to Passover. So it's an interesting connection between rabbinic Judaism and Christianity as far as points of contrast. So, for example, Athanasius, when he makes his list, it's in the context of the Festal Letters, which is the celebration of Easter, right? So you have Passover being in focus there. But this is interesting. This is one Bohr's assessment of Melito's attitude towards the Old Testament as we find it on his work on the Passover. And he writes, quote, Melito's attitude is then the sole purpose of the Old Testament and the history of Israel was to provide a model for the work of Jesus. It had a value in preparing the way for Christ, but only in terms of its fulfillment. In the Peripascha, he does not put forward any considerations about the people of God being formed, guided, and prepared to be a suitable conceptual or moral basis for Christ himself. There is no aspect of the perpetuity. I don't know, the section in my brain that pronounces words this early in the morning just doesn't work, but the preparation of the gospel, I'll just say that. The very long history of Israel for Judaism ceases to have any value or meaning once the reality of Christ arrived. This uncompromising and narrow stance must have been, now this is important, at least partly dictated by the atmosphere of controversy with and hostility towards the Jewish community of Sardis. So basically what he's saying is, if you look at how Melito uses the Old Testament in the work on the Passover or on Pascha or Peripascha, what he notes is that Melito looks at the Old Testament not as a preparation for the gospel, like other early church fathers do, that God is forming his community for the reception of the fullness of his revelation in Christ, the Messiah, but rather the only value the Old Testament has is that it speaks of Christ. It's fulfilled in Christ, and that's it. And what's interesting here is that this author says this view was hammered out and formed by controversies, polemics that Melito had with the Jewish community in Sardis. And that's why he has a kind of rigid, apologetic approach to the Old Testament, if you will. Okay. Any comments on that, by the way? Please put it in the chat room, or if you want to come up, you can click the link. Well, like I said, since we have so little about Melito, we kind of have to use everything we got to bring to the fore to try to understand his list here. So let's recap really quick. Melito is the bishop of Sardis. He's likely a convert from Judaism. His diocese was outnumbered by Jews. There's much larger Jewish community than Christians in Sardis at this time. He views the Old Testament's value is found only in Christ. His views likely came through polemics, like we just read. And yeah, oh, actually, I am inclined. I forgot I did this. I put a little paragraph. How do we know about his Jewish background? As a Jewish convert, Melito would have had intimate knowledge of both his former way of life as a Jew and also knowledge to serve as a bishop in Sardis. Uh, and he's also numbered among the great luminaries in Asia Minor by Polycrates of Ephesus in his letter to Victor of Rome. Melito's focus on the Old Testament in terms of fulfillment of Christ sheds light on the fragment, so extracts. So extracts seems to be really up Melito's uh, alley, so to speak, right? Because of his views on the Old Testament as we find on his other work, it really seems to fit what Melito's doing for the list. Okay, so just FYI, I just want to throw this out there. The English text I'm going to be using for Eusebius is basically the one you find in the the Fathers of the Church series, and which is okay. It's a little paraphrastic. And the Greek text is basically this one, as found in Loeb Classic Library series. Just in case you're wondering what I'm quoting, those are the sources. I may go to other translations. If I do, I'll let you know. Okay. Okay. Take a swig of unsweetened iced tea. And let's jump into the fragment from Eusebius. Now, like I said, we're going to try to squeeze out every drop of information we can in order to form an idea of what's going on with his list. So we're going to begin with how Eusebius introduces the list. Okay. All right. The Greek source is worthy. Yes, it is. It definitely is. It's a good critical text. It's serviceable. Schwartz actually, I think, has a better text, but the Loeb Classic Library is based on Schwartz, so it's about as good as it gets. All right, what does Eusebius? How does he introduce this? He has a little short introduction, but like I said, we're going to squeeze every drop out of it. Now, these passages are found in the above mentioned treatise, but in the extracts written by him, the same author, as he begins his introduction, makes a list of the recognized scriptures of the Old Testament. I feel obliged to give it the list here. His words are as follows. A couple of things. Okay, we already mentioned this. So the list is part of a lost work of Melito called Extracts. Now, Eusebius tells us that in this book of extracts, the list is found at the beginning of the introduction. So this is right at the outset of the work, or onset of the work, excuse me. That's actually a little, I mean, it's a tiny little piece of evidence, but you'll see how it fits in with my theory. Another thing he says is that he gives a list of the recognized scriptures of the Old Testament. Now, Protestant apologists will focus in on that and say, see, recognize there is this ongoing canon. He's going to produce the Christian canon of the Old Testament because these are all the recognized books of the Bible. Well, the word there, yeah, it means recognized or could mean agreed upon. But what's missing is who. Eusebius doesn't say. He says they list the recognized scriptures of the Old Testament, but recognized by whom? Are these the books that are recognized by Christians? Are these the books that are recognized by Jews, rabbis of his day? Are these the books that are recognized by both? Right? He doesn't tell us. He just says these are the recognized books, or the acknowledged books, or the agreed upon books. Okay, so that's important too. So, like I said, some people try to make it out that he's given a Christian canon, but Eusebius really doesn't say that. He just says these are the recognized books. Again, I know it seems like I'm making a lot of or very little, but it's going to be important. Okay, let's continue. Now we are actually in the words by Melito himself. This is the quotation Eusebius is giving. And again, we're going to squeeze out every little drop. Okay, Melito to his brother Onesimus, greetings. Since you have often asked, in your zeal for the true word, that selections or extracts in Greek be made for you from the law and the prophets regarding the Savior and all our faith. And furthermore, since you wish to learn with accuracy about the ancient books, how many there are in number and how they are arranged. Let's just stop there because there's a few things I want to highlight. Onesimus. We don't know who this Onesimus is. You guys probably are familiar with it. After all, Paul wrote a letter to Philemon or Philemon, however you pronounce that, involving a slave that ran away named Onesimus. So this is a biblical name. Although, whether this is the same Onesimus, who knows? Probably not. And the reason I say that is because, well, it's a Greek name, and also it appears that this Onesimus is a bishop. Why do I say that? Well, because Melito addresses Onesimus as his brother. And in the ancient world, and Divine Mercy, maybe you can give me a thumbs up on this, but early church fathers, when bishops wrote to bishops, they often address them as brothers. Usually, if they're addressing laity, it would be my sons or something like that. Although Paul, now I think about it, talks about Timothy and Titus as sons. So Onesimus likely is a bishop. We don't know which diocese or where he came from. In fact, we know nothing about him other than his name and that he asked Melito to make this list. Yes, brother Adelphi. Okay, good. Or Delpho. The extracts, another thing, as we noted, notice it's only from the Old Testament. And not only is it only from the Old Testament, but the extracts concern the Savior and all our faith. That's important. Notice also that he says that he wishes to produce an accurate number and arrangement of books. So the number of titles that he gives is something that he did deliberately. All right. David is in the house. Hey, David, good morning. Or is it? Yeah, it's good morning for you, I think. Is it morning or evening for you? I can't remember. I know our times are really off. But hey, if you want to join us, David, feel free. But I'm sure you got to get off to work. Okay, it is morning. And then, so the contents, of course, the number has to do with the contents. The arrangement is interesting. Why would Onesimus, a Greek, ask Melito Sardis, a possible convert from Judaism, to make him a list of Old Testament books, extracts from Old Testament books about Jesus and the faith, from the Old Testament alone, and want a proper arrangement of those books? Now, this is going off on a limb. I'm not saying this is hard data. Could it be, I'll put it in the form of a question then, could it be that Onesimus, a Greek, is familiar with the Septuagint? The Septuagintal order and arrangement is different from the Hebrew text, right? Septuagint has, I think, 4 or 5 divisions. Rabbinic Judaism adopted a tripartite division, threefold division. So Could that be why he wants the number? He wants to know the contents of the Hebrew, like what the rabbis, rabbinic Judaism accepts. And he also wants to know the arrangement because maybe the Jews arrange their books differently than Christians using the Septuagint. Just throwing it out there, right? Like I said, we're going to squeeze every little drop we can because there's so little to bring to bear on this. And by the way, when you read scholarship, they really don't do this. They don't put all these pieces on the table. They usually just go to Eusebius, reproduce the list, and say this is a Christian Jewish list. This is the objective, inspired books of the canon. And again, for those who are joining us, we're talking about Melito Sardis. Also, remember, guys, if you haven't subscribed, please do hit the bell. Tell your friends. If you know somebody, maybe it's evening where you're living, that's really into questions about the Old Testament canon, love deep dives like this, tell your friends, hey, there's this live stream. Come join it. Love to have them on board. Okay, moving on. And by the way, if I'm going too slow or if you have any questions, let me know. Like I said, I'm trying to squeeze every drop, and then God willing, we'll be able to put it all together and with a nice bow on it by the end of this chill stream. Okay. He says, I have endeavored to do just this, knowing your zeal for the faith and your eagerness for the knowledge about the word, and that as you struggle for your eternal salvation, you judge these matters most important of all in your yearning for God. Yeah, oh, awesome. I'm glad you think that. I'm a nerd. If it was up to me, I'd spend a whole stream just on like one line. Right. Okay. So he's describing Onesimus for us. And here's the English and Greek for you. I don't like how De Ferrari's translation renders this. Here's the Shaft translation. That's the third paragraph here. It's kind of small. It says, I am endeavored to perform the task knowing your zeal for the faith and your desire to gain information in regard to the word, knowing that you and your yearning after God esteem these things above all else, struggling to attain eternal salvation. Yes, actually, that's why I included Shaft, because I don't like that Ferrari's use or translation of this. And actually, James, if I could pick your brain on this, particularly, it's a long sentence in Greek. This last part, it actually seems like it's two clauses. This last line, struggling to attain eternal salvation, I think could actually be better translated something like concerning the struggle or fight of eternal salvation. Because the word agonizo or agomizai, gosh, my brain just can't pronounce words this early. My apologies, guys, if I butcher pronunciations. Greatest apologist now, I'm definitely not. Unless you talk about James. Maybe James is, or David Zavaris. The word there is to engage in intense struggle. This is Loanita, involving physical or non-physical force against a strong opposition. That's the word translated struggling, or struggle, struggling. It's actually a participle. I think if you wanted to get as literal as possible on that last line, I think it'd be something like concerning the fight for eternal salvation or of eternal salvation. But I'm not an expert in Greek, but that's how I read it. All right. Morning, James.
Good morning, brother. God bless you.
Hey, welcome to the chill stream, my friend. What do you think? How would you do that?
Are we clear on Melito having access to St. Paul's letters?
That's a good question.
I'll tell you what. St.
uh,
Paul in his address to St. Timothy, okay,
yes.
in 1 Timothy 6, the same word is applied, right? Agona.
Mhm.
And then it's also applied in the variant, which is aginozome. And
Interesting.
if I can zoom in,
Oh yeah.
yours
I'm sorry.
yours renders agoni zomenos. Agoni zomenos. Okay.
Yes.
It's an interesting word. I've been actually working on it for months. That one
Really?
word in the New Testament is very interesting. Um, if he has access to say 1 Corinthians 9
Uh-huh.
or Timothy, 1 Timothy 6 or 2 Timothy 4, then um, it would be rendered fight, just like you said,
Mhm.
because the majority of biblical translators render that word as fight.
Okay.
So you'll see it in 1 Timothy 6:12. Fight the good fight,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
You'll see it
Very good.
rendered in that verse. You'll even see it when Paul declares that he's received the crown of immortality. When Paul knows he's going to be martyred, right? In 2 Timothy 4,
Right.
he states, I have fought the good fight. The word there is agonizome, right? Same
Okay.
word that's being used here. So I think you're right on the money when you intend on translating it as fight.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Struggling, fighting for or of eternal salvation. It's I yeah. Okay. Good. So
I just think it would be interesting if you had St. Paul's letters, right?
yeah. I'm trying
And
to
it's
think
rendered
if
in the
he
Gospels
does.
too, but if he had St. Paul's letters, that'd be interesting because he's
Yeah.
using it almost in the manner St. Paul's using it.
Right. Yeah.
So
Interesting. Yeah. So struggling to attain. See, the thing is, it doesn't say it. Struggling to obtain salvation. Salvation is just in the genitive. Eternal salvation of eternal salvation. So it could be understood that way. Um, and with De Ferrari, he actually puts in for your eternal salvation. He doesn't say for your. That's an addition, unless he's got that from earlier in the phrase when he dresses te. You know,
I
you.
think you might think it's like a logical inference.
Yeah.
So if you remove your, uh, as you struggle for eternal salvation, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. I think this could be a veiled reference to polemics, like arguing about eternal salvation, and not necessarily that he's um, trying to be saved, to grow in holiness. I
you
think that,
judge these matters. You judge these matters, most important of all, in your yearning, in your fight for God, in your struggle for God.
yeah,
I have endeavored to do just this, knowing your zeal for the faith. So if he's addressing someone that is his brother, right?
yes, yeah,
And he's saying that you can judge because you're zealous for the faith. He has to speak. He has to be speaking to someone who's a cohort, and he'd have to be a bishop as well, right?
yeah. That seems to be it.
I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
trying to.
it's funny. You could read it two ways. It could be that the reason why Onesimus asked for these books is because he just really loves the Lord and he wants to learn the Bible, right? But the when I read it, there's also another sense you could take this. is that Onesimus is really zealous for Christianity. Okay. He's zealous. He wants to learn the word for the purposes of apologetics. And that this fight that he's talking about, yeah, it could be his own personal struggle to grow in holiness, but it could also refer to fighting for Christianity, like fighting for eternal salvation, matters of eternal salvation. So I think you could take it one of two ways. And I just wanted to point that out, that it seems like, he references his zeal for the faith. He references his desire for knowledge. And then the last part, he references this struggle, this, intense struggle against the strong opposition. But what's the strong opposition? What's the strong opposition for attaining eternal salvation? That might be a personal struggle, or it could be an extrinsic struggle of battling
Could
with
be the
people.
Christian walk.
Yeah, it
It
could be the
like
Christian
a
walk.
soteriological statement, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
hey,
Exactly.
don't stop striving.
Right. Or it could be struggling to evangelize, to defend the faith in regards to salvation. In other words, somebody might have an opposite understanding of salvation, and you're battling against them. See, I think it could go either
in a
way.
New Testament narrative, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I think you're right, because the term is used in a few ways, of which it denotes like a temporal struggle, like an actual struggle. Like if you and I are wrestling, I would struggle because you're twice my size. So, you know, um, but as well, like I said, St. Paul, in various times, when he declares that he might save some in 1 Corinthians 9:22, he actually thus talks about the fight,
Right.
and the run.
Right.
So, like I said, it could be in two ways. It could be like,
Yeah.
hey, don't forget that you're struggling, you're struggling into your salvation, right?
Yeah.
You have to persevere. You have to fight, quote, fight the good fight. I don't know. Could be taken a couple
Yeah,
ways.
both ways. And same thing with Paul. Like if you look at the struggles of Paul, yeah, he talks about doing many fasts and so on and so forth. You know, pummeling his body and training it so that he won't be rejected. But on the other hand, he also battles the Jews. So it's I just wanted to point that out, that it could go either way depending on how you read this.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Okay. Yeah. It's not a huge point. But that's awesome though that you were looking at that very same word. Boy, divine providence. Thanks be to God. Okay.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. So if I can impose, do you want to remain here on stage and we can go through the rest of this? We only have a few more.
Yeah, no, I'm here, man. Go for it.
Okay. You're awesome. Thank you for being so generous. Okay. So
God bless you, brother. You're the one that's being generous. I'm the one learning here.
oh, well, there's a portion here because you have a really good grasp of Jewish literature. I'd love to see what your reaction is to my theory. Okay, let's press on, guys. So he says, Onesimus, you're zealous. You want to know the number, the arrangement of books. See, that's another thing. What does that have to do with soteriology, right? What does knowing the number of books and the arrangement of books have to do with struggling to obtain, for your own personal holiness? It seems disconnected. That's why I think, there's another shade here to polemics when he's saying that. Okay, so he says this, because you want to know the correct number, the accurate number, and you want to know the arrangement, and you want these extracts from those books. Melito says, accordingly, I went to the east and came to the place where these things were preached and done. I learned accurately the books of the Old Testament. Actually, it's Old Covenant.
Right.
And send them to thee as written below. Yeah, it's interesting. I think Eusebius says Old Testament He says Old Covenant, if I remember. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter.
So
But
here's
go ahead.
here's what I've gauged out of this.
Mhm.
So soteriological statement. I'm going to go with that for the first statement. Okay.
Okay.
And then it says, I went east.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I went east and went to the place where these things were preached and done. Right? Is that evangelion for preached? What is used?
Let's see. Place where...
No,
No, it's not.
And okay, so that to me still seems like a soteriological statement.
Okay.
And then I guess the next sentence would be like, how do I replicate this? And you want to replicate this, so here's the books they used.
Yes. Now,
I
when he
learned
says...
accurately the books of the Old Testament and sent them to thee as written below. Why speak of the man's zeal and then saying, hey, by the way, I'm sending them to you? Only thing in between the man's zeal and sending the books is this very obvious soteriological notion. That's what I'm gathering from this.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's more polemical, but that's okay. I mean, I think Onesimus is engaging in polemics with Jews. He needs to know which books they accept because it differs from Christians. And therefore, he asked Melito to give him an accurate statement and also excerpts from those books for the purpose of polemics. So that's a spoiler alert, guys. That's what I'm going for. He says that I went to the place where these things were preached and done. What are these things referred to? These things is the books found in the Old Covenant. So he's going to the Holy Land. Okay, so I don't think there's a connection with where the Gospels preached necessarily, but rather where these events in the Old Testament took place. I think that's kind of what he's referring to. And I don't see evangelion being used in the text. I think he uses a different word if I could find it. But anyway, but here's the question, though. We established Melito is the Bishop of Sardis. He's very well known and well thought of in the ancient world. So he's a good bishop. Why does he have to travel east to provide the books that are read in his own liturgy? Doesn't he know which books are being read at Mass? He is a bishop, and he's a good bishop. How could he possibly be ignorant of which books are being read if Onesimus is asking for a Christian canon, right? And why doesn't Onesimus, if he's a bishop, why doesn't he know which books are being read in his liturgies?
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, he called him brother, but this can't be a bishop who's a brother. It could be a brother in the sense that they're Christian brothers. They're both
No,
followers.
actually, no, I think he is a bishop. I think they both are bishops. But even if he isn't, let's say he's a layperson and he's writing to a bishop to find out the books. Why doesn't Melito know, or how can he not know, which books are being read in the liturgies? Right? So why does he have to travel east, all the way to the Holy Land, to figure out which books are supposed to be read in his own liturgy that Christians have been reading apparently since the time of the book of Revelation? Right? There's something going on here if you're interpreting this as a Christian list. And then you have another interesting problem. I brought this up in my debate with James White. Why didn't he go to other churches surrounding Sardis? Why does he have to travel all the way to Palestine? And how come they didn't know? I mean, it is a kind of long travel from Sardis to Jerusalem, right? So presumably that's where he went, because in his on the Passover, he seems to be familiar with Jerusalem. Why is it that he had to travel all the way there and nobody along the way could give him accurate information? Right? I'm just laying this out, that this causes a huge tension. Why does he have to travel? Why doesn't he know which books are in the liturgy? And if Onesimus is a bishop, like scholars think, why don't both of them know? So
Yeah, I don't buy it. I
yeah,
don't buy it.
so
I'm sorry.
yeah, so what does that mean? And then there's the added problem. Why didn't Melito just ask the Jews in Sardis which books belong in the Bible? Right? Well, Lee Martin McDonald says this. He says, quote, further, why did the local Jewish community in Sardis not have the information that Melito wanted to know about the scope of the Old Testament scriptures? How universal and generally accepted could the Hebrew biblical canon have been at the end of the 2nd century CE if the Jews in Sardis could not help Melito with the appropriate information? Right? He could have asked the Jews in Sardis, didn't they know which books are in the Bible? Didn't he know which books are in the Bible? Didn't Onesimus know? You know what I mean? So there's apparent tension here, right? It seems like
And we
there's
approach.
confusion.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just finishing. Go ahead.
So we approach this thesis. We approach the thesis of yours, granting full historical value to the New Testament, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. I mean, there's a condemnation to the church at Sardis in Revelation 3.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't imagine God condemning the angel of the church at Sardis and the angel not having at least the revelation. Now,
Right.
I'm not saying that everything is written by then. I'm not making that error. But you would imagine by the time Melito is saying this, there would be an established Christian infrastructure, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
Okay. Yep. So as we continue, hopefully I'll start filling in the pieces, and I think you'll see. I'm going to give you a framework that this makes sense, because it doesn't make sense as it is, right? Now, Roger Beckwith, who's Protestant, this work, the Old Testament Canon, New Testament Church, is a standard work for Protestant apologetics on the canon. It has been for a while. His take on this is the following, and I'm going to basically tear this apart, okay? Because I think he's wrong. If Melito had wished to consult the Jews, he need only have consulted the Jews in his own city. Okay, that's obvious. Sardis, where there was a prominent Jewish community, to whom the canon was probably well known as it was of the Jews in Palestine. So according to Beckwith, the Jews in Sardis knew the canon, the Jews in Palestine knew the canon. What's going on here? So his theory is the reason why he looked to Palestine must surely be that he wished to consult Christians and finding uncertainty and difference in the opinion among Christians near home, he decided to refer his question to the mother churches of Christendom in the land in which the gospel had first gone out. There, so he considered, laid his best hope for learning the primitive Christian canon. So you can see where Beckwith is like, no, the list represents what Christians believe the Old Testament is, which is how Protestant apologetics universally interpret them. Yeah, there's all sorts of problems. One thing I'm not going to touch on, but the mother churches of Christendom, in 170 AD, when Melito was writing this, Jerusalem was devastated.
Yeah, and life was hard for Christians.
Yeah, it had ceased to become Jerusalem. It had become the Capitol Aelina. It was a Roman colony. There was a church in Jerusalem that was Christian. By this time had turned entirely Greek. It was a Gentile church. It wasn't looked at as the mother church that people would go to at this point in history. Right. And as Catholics, we'd say Rome would be. But that beside the point. That's kind of far-fetched that oh, I'll go back to the most ancient Christian churches in Jerusalem. That doesn't make sense as far as their knowledge and so on. But okay, I want to knock the stuffing out of this. Okay. So, James, you're already giggling, so this is going to be a lot of fun. Okay. Let me fill that out a little bit more for you guys. I made this little chart just to situate us in history, because I said this is going to be a deep chill stream. We're going to go deep into Melito. I think the history of the Jews is so important for interpreting Melito's list, and the history of Christianity as well. So I have this little chart. It runs chronologically from the top to the bottom. So just to give you a history of what's going on as far as the canon is concerned, sometime around 100 AD, the Jews have begun to stabilize the Hebrew text, coalescing to what becomes the Masoretic text. So stabilization begins around 100. And then you have the diaspora revolts in Alexandria, 115, 117. And then, well, actually, even before this, there's the first Jewish revolt, the temple's destroyed. The Jews form a synagogue, a place of leadership in Jamnia around 100 AD. That's when work started stabilizing the text, the Hebrew text at Jamnia in this period. The Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Then you have the diaspora revolts. And then you have the reign of Hadrian from 117, 118. And there begins the second Jewish revolt in 132, 135. Sometime within this period, between 117 and 135, Rabbi Akiba ben Joseph begins work picking out oral traditions of the Jews and codifying it. The Jews weren't allowed to write down oral tradition. Akiba breaks that rule. He begins writing it down. Why? Because the temple is destroyed. The center of Judaism is destroyed. Now rabbinic Judaism begins to form in Jamnia. So he's codifying some oral traditions of the Jews, not all. So some of them are lost entirely to history. Some of them are preserved in the Mishnah. Also, Akiba backs Bar Kokhba with the second Jewish revolt. By the way, Bar Kokhba is a false messiah. He says he's the messiah prophesied in the Book of Numbers. Also around this time, Akiba rejects the Septuagint, and one of Akiba's disciples named Aquila writes a replacement Greek translation known as the Aquila translation, which is a very hyper-literal Greek translation of the Hebrew Masoretic text, which has been adopted as the normative text in Judaism up until this time. There were many different texts that were in circulation among the Jews. Akiba seems to be the one who adopts a single normative text. And when he adopts that single normative text, all the books included in that text become canonical, so to speak. The ones that aren't are rejected. So this is really the formation of the rabbinic canon, in my understanding. I think that happened under Akiba sometime in the first quarter of the second Christian century. So I'm laying out my theory here. As we continue, what happens with the Bar Kokhba revolt, and James, if you want to chime in anytime, please do. The Bar Kokhba revolt, this false messiah, ushers in a catastrophic persecution of Judaism. In fact, it really is divine providence that the Jews were able to survive this second revolt, because Hadrian ushers in the Hadrianic persecution, where your circumcision is forbidden. Anybody caught studying the law or teaching the law was burned. They would be wrapped in the Torah scroll and be set on fire. In fact, Akiba's martyred that way. He's burned alive. Jewish sages are burned alive. It's total devastation. The Romans want, this is the second revolt. They're not going to have a third. This is where Jerusalem's renamed. It's made a Roman colony. The Jews aren't even allowed to come within eyesight of Jerusalem to mourn its loss. That's how devastating this persecution is. So much so that any sage or scholar in the Holy Land has to get out of town. And a very important Rabbi Meir gets out of town as well. So during this persecution, he's living abroad. Eventually, the persecution starts to subside with the reign of Antonius Pius in 139, 140 AD. Okay. That's when Rabbi Meir returns to not Jamnia. Jamnia has moved to Usha up north, or Usha. I'm not sure how you pronounce Usha or Usha. But Jamnia has moved up, so the center of Judaism is now up north. Rabbi Meir comes back, the persecution's dying down. Finally, with Antonius Pius, you have the Hadrianic persecution coming to an end. This is about 140 or 150 AD. The Sanhedrin is reconstituted in Usha, and finally, it's like rabbinic Judaism has survived, okay, which, like I said, is a miracle. Then you have the reign of Marcus Aurelius, 161, 180. Now, remember what we mentioned earlier. Melito had written a defense of Christianity for Marcus Aurelius. I'm a little confused because there's also Marcus Aurelius Verus. So I'm not really sure how that fits out, but I just want to put this in time frame, right? Judah the Prince comes to reign about 170 to 217. So this is actually during the period that we're looking at. Melito Sardis was writing during this period. By the way, there's also another canon list that some scholars date roughly to this period, known as the Berenios list. I kind of think it probably does fall within this period, but that's a different discussion. I just want to be as complete as possible. Then you have another revolt in 175, and the Mishas finally completed, according to Jewish tradition, under Judah the Prince, roughly around 190, 200 AD. So that's after Melito's list. And then you have the Emperor Commodius coming to reign in 180, 192. And then from 200 to 220, we might have the Brita Baba Bathra, a rabbinic list, although scholars actually argue that it's much later. But the earliest date that could have come on the scene would be this. And then you have Gamaliel III coming to reign in 217, 240, the patriarch Gamaliel, to 247. So what's important here is, I wish I had a pointer so I could show you guys on this list, but it's only under Antonius Pius that Judaism, the persecution ends. Now, if Akiba, way back in the first quarter of the second Christian century, had adopted a normative Hebrew text, you have the failed Bar Kokhba revolt, you have the Hadrianic persecution following it, almost wipes out Judaism. It was until this period, about a decade, roughly around the time of Justin Martyr, that finally Judaism is starting to reconstitute itself. Now, the stuff that Akiba had done most likely didn't get out to the diaspora, right? It was circulating amongst rabbis during this heated persecution. It's only now that once the Sanhedrin has been reconstituted, that Judaism begins to take that normative text and try to bring it abroad to make all of Judaism adopt a single norm, okay? Because the diaspora always looks to the Sanhedrin in the Holy Land for its norm, right? Norm, practice, and prayer. It's always looking back to that. So it really couldn't have until roughly right before Melito's Sardis because of the persecution. And so what happens is the synagogue is reconstituted. The patriarch is reinstalled. We didn't have a patriarch from the Bar Kokhba revolt until Marcus Aurelius. And they begin to send out what's called apostoli or apostoli. Okay. These are messengers. They're like deputized rabbis that go throughout Judaism. They collect the patriarchal texts, and they also have the authority to remove teachers and make adjustments in local synagogues. And these apostoli are sent out, and it's during this early stage when these people are being sent out that Melito writes his list. Okay, now I told you it's a big deep dive. Okay, if you look at the historical context, which we have this list, and you look at Onesimus and Melito and everybody else not knowing what books are in the Bible, okay, I think you have the answer to all this ignorance. Okay. Okay, now God willing, let me tie everything up. Oh, well, okay. So this is my theory, guys. My theory is the reason why. Okay, my theory is this. I believe Melito and Onesimus knew which books were being read in their own liturgies. I don't see how they couldn't have. Okay. I think what's going on here is Onesimus wants to engage in apologetics with the Jews. Maybe the Jews are, engaging apologetics with him. But he needs to know which books are officially adopted within Judaism to do that effectively. Because some Jews are saying, he's quoting from the Septuagint. Some Jews are saying, hey, those books aren't in my Bible, or that's not authoritative. Some Jews think it's authoritative. There's some confusion. So he asked Melito, who's a convert from Judaism, well, what exactly is the official collection? So it's not Christians who are not sure what books belong in the Bible. I think it's Rabbinic Judaism's confused. And that's why the community at Sardis doesn't have an answer for Melito. And Melito doesn't really have an answer. Why? Because these new norms are just starting to be flown, taken out of Usha, right? The apostoli are just being sent. So Melito's not quite sure, and the Jews in Sardis aren't quite sure what is the official rabbinic norm, because they might have heard rumors about, that there's this normative collection that's been adopted. But with all the confusion from the Hadrianic persecution, they're not really sure. So what does Melito do? Well, he travels to the Sanhedrin or thereabouts to get the word from the horse's mouth. That's why he travels to the place where these things were done, because he wants to find out, okay, what is this norm that has recently been adopted? Okay. What do you think about that, James?
I think it's interesting.
Yeah. I think it makes sense in this point in history. That's why the Jews are confused. And that's why Beckwith is totally off when he says Melito's trying to get a Christian list from Christians in the Holy Land. I don't think it makes sense at this point in history. Okay, so at this early date, it would seem more likely that the new rabbinic norms would have been better known in Palestine than it would in Sardis, right? Sardis is Western Judaism, the diaspora. It's not part of the Holy Land. Different language, lots of barriers. Okay. Moreover, it strains credulity that two bishops, Melito and possibly Onesimus, didn't know which books were being read in their liturgies, right? That's just crazy. Now, Beckwith says that the reason why Christians wouldn't know which books were in the Bible, Beckwith says, quote, due especially to the breach with Jewish tradition and the growing popularity of apocryphal books, whereas doubt had at this date was entirely laid to rest among the Jews. Okay, so he says The reason why Christians didn't know is because, well, they're broke off from Jewish tradition, and also you have apocryphal books being circulated. So Christians didn't know which books were in the Bible. But that's just not possible. Given the newly circulating replacement text for the Septuagint, the Aquila text, the newly reconstituted patriarchy, and the apostolate recently set in action, Beckwith's scenario just doesn't seem likely at all. There must have been confusion in the diaspora concerning the contents of the new Hebrew norm based on what we saw in history. Also, Melito wasn't cut off from Jewish tradition, right? Even if some Christians were, if Christians were cut off from Jewish tradition, Jews were also cut off from Jewish tradition because of the catastrophic revolts that occurred in the Holy Land. So it isn't purely a Christian phenomenon. I believe the diaspora was cut off as well. Second, Beckwith is speaking about the knowledge of Christians as a whole, but we're talking about two individuals, Melito and Onesimus. If Melito is indeed a convert from Judaism, then there wasn't a, quote, breach with Jewish tradition, unquote, for him, right? He knew Jewish tradition well because he's a convert from Judaism, right? And he's also engaging in all these polemics with the large Jewish community in Sardis. So Beckwith's idea that, well, the Christians were cut off from Jewish tradition, they didn't know which books were in the Bible, so they had to beg the Jews to give them the authentic books, is nonsense. Melito knew there was no breach, right? So if Melito knew Jewish tradition and he could have consulted Jews in Sardis and he didn't get a good answer, it follows that the Jews in Sardis were confused as well, right? They had to have been confused as well. And that's why.
Very peculiar. Very odd.
Yeah. So I think my scenario makes sense, right? I don't think Beckwith's scenario holds water at all. You know, this idea that, well, Christians were cut off from Jewish tradition. Historically, I think the Jews were. I think Christians maintain their tradition. They just have a different canon, right? Yeah. Well, thank you, Gentle Warrior. I appreciate that. Yeah. Like I said, we kind of have to glean as much information as possible. Okay. So that would make sense that going back to, remember Eusebius's introduction of Melito? Remember he said that Melito makes a catalog of acknowledged books?
Right.
I believe the acknowledged books is the agreed upon books that Christians and Jews share.
Right.
And that's why he makes selections from the law and the prophets, because it's apologetic for Jews. It's not an instruction or catechism for Christians. If it were a catechism for Christians, you would expect more New Testament, right? At least. But this makes sense. It seems like what we're dealing with here is an apologetic work, an anti-Jewish apologetic work. And this, by the way, is recognized by McGilford. This is a footnote found in the Schaff version of the early Nicene Fathers. I forgot what exact edition. Yeah, selected Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers, Eusebius. In the footnote, he points this out. You know, just read the footnote here. I'll skip the Greek for you guys. Jerome speaks the word as the eklogion, libros sex. So basically, eklogion, 6 books. There are no fragments of it extant except in a single one in the preface here in Eusebius. The nature of the work is clear from the words of Melito himself. It was a collection of testimonies to Christ and to Christianity drawn from the Old Testament law and prophets. It must therefore have resembled closely such works as Cyprian's Testimonia and the Testimony of Pseudo Gregory and other anti-Jewish works, in which appeal is made to the Old Testament. the common ground accepted by both parties. In other words, this resembles other Christian lists that are basically used for polemics against the Jews. They're all exclusively Old Testament references, and they represent the common ground accepted by Christians and Jews. That's a very important point right there. For proof of the truth of Christianity. Although the eklogia of Melito is not anti-Jewish in their design, the character leads us to classify them as a general class of anti-Jewish works, whose distinguishing mark is the use of Old Testament prophecy in defense of Christianity. So here we have a Protestant. This is his dissertation and also an article, which he says if you classify extracts, it falls within Jewish Christian polemical works. And similar to the Testimonia. By the way, Testimonia is just Latin for like list of testimonies, or think of it as proof text. Yeah, apologetic proof text of the ancient world. And that seems to be the case too. So I think this is a breakthrough right here. If we categorize the genre here as a polemical work, apologetic work, then the list that Melito gives isn't the Christian canon per se. It represents only the books that the rabbinic Judaism and Christianity accept. Right? Just like I'm a Catholic apologist, when I talk with a Protestant, I only use texts from the Protestant Bible. Why? Because those are the texts that both of us mutually accept as authoritative. It wouldn't make sense for me to quote Tobit or Judith or Baruch, right, to a Protestant.
He's requesting their books as to produce an internal critique.
Exactly. And so if we understand Melito, like Beckwith, he says this is a Christian list, and that's the full extent of the books that Christians accept. That's nonsense, if this is true. Just like if I gave a list of books that Protestants accept, it would be wrong for people to infer that that's the books that I accept, or only the books I accept. Because obviously I'm telling you what Protestants accept. That doesn't necessarily reflect what I accept as a Catholic or an Orthodox. And I think the same thing's true with Melito, right? This is telling us, it's giving us a picture of what rabbinic Judaism accepts at this point in time, but it doesn't tell us much about what Christians accept, except for they're mutually accepted. Hopefully that makes sense. If it makes sense, put a 1 in the chat room. If you're totally lost, just put a 2. Hopefully there won't be a lot of 2s. If you have any questions too, or if you want to come up here, love to have you. Okay, so let me tie this up a little bit. So Melito's Extracts, therefore, is a Christian apologetic work that's used to evangelize the Jews. Given Melito's polemical interaction with the Jews in Sardis, and especially that he was a convert from Judaism, Onesimus could not have picked a better person to make the extracts, right? He knows Christianity. He knows Judaism. He's engaged in polemics with Jews. He himself is a former Jew. Melito's the perfect guy to tap for this list. The genre also explains the contents of Melito's list, namely the need to identify the common ground between Christians and Jews in order to deduce effective proof text and dialogue. Since the question was on which books Christians and Jews hold in common, there's no need to consult the mother churches of Christendom, but rather to consult the Jews themselves, especially the most authoritative. And also the inability to ascertain the answer in Sardis, or apparently from neighboring cities, shows that such information was not generally known at the time. Therefore, Melito went east and came to the place where these things were preached and done. Okay, so that's how I kind of line up all this evidence. And by the way, I want to show, I think the next one's Epiphanius. Yeah. James, how do you pronounce? I pronounce it Epiphanius, but I've heard it Epiphanius.
I say Epiphanios.
Epiphanios, okay. Yeah, I've heard it different. I'm the type of person, if I learn a name wrong, not just the early fathers, but people I meet, like if I hear it wrong, it's so hard for me to change. So I want you guys to extend grace to me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but I've always pronounced it Epiphanius. So forgive me. But anyway, the
You
reason I
know,
bring, yeah,
does
go ahead.
Epiphanius, sorry, do you mind if I ask you, does
Yeah,
Epiphanius make direct reference to Melito?
no, but
Okay.
this is interesting. At least to me, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, James, and anybody else out there that would like to chime in. Um, there's no connection between the two that I know of.
Oh,
Although I'm sure that Epiphanius or Epiphanius knew of
there sure,
Melito,
there
right?
is a connection, but not overly. They're both apologetic and polemic, both
Yes, exactly.
Epiphanius and Melito.
Yeah. In fact, in the Panarion, um, Epiphanius or Epiphanius does essentially the same thing in his book of extracts against the Marcionites. So here we have another book actually called Extracts, written later. Okay. And what does he do? Like Melito's list, he gives a brief description of Marcion's canon from which he drew his material. Quote, from this very canon that he retains the gospel and the Pauline epistles, I can show that with God's help that Marcion is a fraud and an error and can refute him very effectively. For he will be refuted from the very works in which he acknowledges without dispute from these two books, the Gospel and the Apostolic Canon. I made a series of extracts, the same word, of selected material, which arranging the points in order and numbering each. So the reason I bring up this particular early church father is, interesting enough, he also wrote a book known as Extracts. It's found here in the Panarion. And notice he draws the extracts explicitly from the books that Marcion had received, because Marcion, denied certain elements of the New Testament and the Old Testament, right? So at the outset of his refutation in extracts, just like Melito, remember Eusebius said at the beginning of the introduction, he gives the list. Well, Epiphanius or Epiphanius, or however you want to pronounce it, he does the same thing for his extracts. He starts off by discussing the canon, and then he gives the quotations directly from the books that Marcion accepts. And he says he does this because he wants to refute him using his own works, kind of turning his own weapons against them. So I found that to be very interesting, that there's this kind of parallel and that they're both called extracts. I think that kind of lends probability that Melito's list, that it comes from extracts and it's at the introduction. It's just part of the form of this genre, right? That you need to lay out what books they accept if it's different, and then use that material to produce extracts from for polemics. What do you think, James?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. It really is.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? It almost sounds like he uses their canon as a bibliography of his polemic. He's
Yes,
not saying it's our canon. He's
exactly.
saying it's your canon that's now my bibliography for this document I'm about to write.
Exactly. I agree. Totally. Yeah. Because you want to, just like with Protestants, I'm a Catholic apologist. If I'm discussing the faith with Protestants, I'm going to use their canon. I'm going to try to refute them with using their Old Testament, because I can't use mine because they don't accept the deuterocanonical books or the so-called Apocrypha. Same thing. So he's saying, yeah, Marcion, I'm going to beat you on your own home turf. I'm not going to use the books you don't accept. I'm going to use the ones you accept. And here are the proof texts against what you're teaching. Now, he doesn't. So obviously, he doesn't accept Marcion's canon. Marcion has a different canon than Epiphanius or Ephanius, but he's using it for polemics. They're different, right? Which is kind of interesting, because what does that imply about Melito's list? If Melito is doing the same thing, this is the same genre, it implies that Christians and Rabbinic Judaism has two different canons. That's why he needs to list the books at the outset of his work. If they shared the same canon, there wouldn't be a need for that, right? Yeah, just right, exactly. So I think, if anything, Melito hints at the fact that Rabbinic Judaism actually is operating with a different norm than Christians are, as far as the books of the Old Testament. Okay, let me take a quick peek at the next slide, because I don't remember. Okay. Yeah, okay, we'll go up to this. One more point, guys, and then we'll end the chill stream. Okay. By the way, for those joining us just now, if you're just joining us and you haven't subscribed, please do like, hit the bell, do all that stuff. Okay. Final point. I think it's clear that Melito's list isn't a Christian list. It's a rabbinic list. And the reason is actually recognized by Roger Beckwith, because Melito omits the book of Esther. Remember I said that at the beginning of the live stream? One of the peculiarities of Melito's list is it doesn't have Esther. So
Right.
Roger Beckwith says the dispute regarding the sacredness of Esther probably became known to Palestine Christians in the second Christian century, which would explain why Melito, who draw his list from Palestine, omits it. Well, that's not really true, because Christians always accepted Esther. We have no record. Now, they didn't use Esther very much. Okay, there's only a handful of uses of Esther in Christian literature. All of them are positive, by the way. But in rabbinic literature, the sacredness of Esther was disputed, and this is known throughout. Everybody understands this. For centuries, Esther's place in the canon was not solid. There was lots of disputes about the sacredness of that book. Now remember, Hebrew Esther does not mention the name of God, does not have acts of piety or prayer. It's very much almost like a secular history. It's the Septuagint that mentions God and has prayer and fasting and so on and so forth, not the Hebrew. And rabbis had, many rabbis rejected the sacredness of the book. So the fact that Melito omits Esther would reflect more rabbinic discussions than Christian, because, like I said, it doesn't seem to be disputed at all amongst Christians whether Esther's on, but it was disputed with the rabbis. Okay. So again, Beckwith's wrong. It doesn't comport with what we know about Christianity. They weren't discussing, Esther wasn't in doubt by Christians. It was in doubt with Rabbinic Judaism. Any final thoughts, James?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to end it here. And Wednesday, the chill stream for Wednesday, we're going to discuss this. We're going to go to Melito's list, and we're going to discuss when he says the Proverbs of Solomon and his wisdom. Is he referring to an alternative title for Proverbs, or is he referring to a deuterocanonical book? And I think my take on this will probably surprise you. Spoiler alert, I think it's a deuterocanonical book, but you're not going to guess which book it is. I'll save that for you. So that's a little tease for the Wednesday chill stream. So any final questions in the chat room, if you want to throw it up there? Guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's really mind-blowing that anybody would be on this live stream at this hour. And be willing to do a deep dive on things like Melito, Sardis. So I truly appreciate you being here. James, any final thoughts or comments?
No, brother. God bless you. Thank you for everything you do.
Yeah. Hey, I got some great thumbnails coming up. Just FYI.
Yeah, this one was a good one too today.
Oh, you like? Yeah, very good. Thank you. That one was actually AI generated. Let's see. I'm going to try to. I got to show you a couple. This will be a nice little Easter egg. By the way, guys, if you've made it to the end of this live stream, in the chat room, put down Sardis. That's your trophy, guys. Sardis. What in the world?
You know, thinking of the rabbinic writings, I'm getting a few guesses for the word wisdom here, but I'm not going to ruin it either.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. Well, we can compare notes then. We'll come back and compare notes. I don't know why StreamYard won't let me do stuff. Very weird. Let's see. Let me try this. Maybe I can upload it like a PDF. No, it won't let me do that. It won't let me upload images on StreamYard. I'm not sure why it does that. Image file. Maybe this will work. Okay, but I want to give it. Oh, okay. Yeah, it actually worked. Okay, guys, hold on to your seats. I got some really good thumbs for you. Is this the one? All right. Yeah, here we go. Let me put this on stage.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, Ghostbusters. That was actually the wrong one, though. Let me figure out how I did this. It's better. It's funny how the faces, you have to try different combinations. Because some are better than others. I can't find it now. But there's another one that works even better. I'm going to use it for a thumbnail. Maybe. Yeah, I think this is the one. There we go. Not this one. This one.
Who are you going to call? Apocrypha Apocalypse.
Yeah, gotta love that one. If you don't mind, I want to share a couple. I've been having so much fun, James. Thank you so much.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Yeah. And I wanted stuff I'm really proud of here. This is what I've been doing. Stuff research.
If you know the guy Minaya in the comments, I have more fun doing this than you can imagine, man.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah. Now look in the background. You'll see Voice of Reason and Carlo Broussard. And you know what? Dave Savaras makes a really good Beatle. Don't know why. But that one's fun. Oh, by the way, Catherine Ryan, thank you so much for the memberships. Thank you for the gift memberships. Totally appreciate it. Yeah, so instead of doing research and preparing for my classes, I've been doing this. One more. I'll give you one more. This one I'm really proud of. If I could find it really quick. All right, here you go, guys. Ready?
Oh wow, that one turned out really good.
Yeah, look at Sam as a cop.
Oh man, you made William the bum in the background.
Yeah, I had to. I have an alternative one where they're different, but
that's funny, man. Yeah. I think you got the best one though.
Yeah, well, let's see if I can find the alternative one. Okay, so you're Canadian, so this is like sacred material for you.
Wayne's World. Yeah, come on, man.
Okay, there we go. So David is the background. William is Wayne. It's so funny. It's worth doing live streams just so I could show off this stuff. It's hilarious. So
Man,
anyway, see
if
now
you
I
only
was
know how many I have. If
okay,
you
my
only know.
brother. Really?
Oh,
So I was going to put you in here. Now, of course, you don't show your face. You have a ski mask on, right? I was going to put you there by the register. I might still do that. I might get a clip of somebody with a ski mask by the register just as a homage to you because you're Canadian. This is a Canadian donut shop. You need to be there. But the problem is, if I do that, it's going to look like the donut shop's being robbed, which might actually be funnier.
yeah.
But I want to put you in there because you're definitely part of the team, as far as I'm concerned. At least for the chill streams, you definitely are part of the team. So,
God bless you, man. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
all right, yeah. Well, there's more to come, guys. So, even if you don't like our live stream, at least the thumbnails are give you a laugh, right?
Hey, did you see that I aired with Elijah Yassi last night?
No, I didn't.
So if you
See
go
that.
to my channel, just take a look, take a gander at the thumbnail.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look that. Definitely do that, guys. Also, please support our brother with James at the Divine Mercy Apologetics. Check it out. Check out the thumbnail, and while you're there, subscribe, like, hit the bell, do all that stuff for him. He's doing great work, and although he's derailing my days because he gave me this link to the program, and I'm just having a ball with it. So. So you're a distraction, which is cool, and in a good way. In a good way. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
man.
James,
I could spend hours doing that too. Don't
I
get
know.
it misunderstood. God
Don't
bless you,
worry
brother.
about it. All right. God bless you. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, my friend. All right. Well, guys, I got to end the chill stream. Thank you for joining us again. Last call. Subscribe, like, ring the bell. Thank you so much for those gift memberships. I really, truly appreciate it. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to thank you when you did that. Also, the super chats, all that stuff. My family and I appreciate it. Enables me to get up early in the morning and do this without my family complaining. Right. So I'm going to do another live stream early morning, my time, Wednesday. We'll finish up Melito Sardis. I can't wait to find out what James has in his store for wisdom. I have my take on it. Wonder if they're the same. We'll find out. Also, we try to do a team live stream on Wednesdays and Fridays with David Zavaris and William Albrecht. I don't know whether both are going to be there or only one. That takes place 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm not sure where in the world you are, but if you can make it to that live stream, it's a lot of fun with the guys. They're going to have a big debate. I believe it's this Friday. So please keep both of them in your prayers that they're able to be articulate and defend the word of God. And yeah, that's about it, guys. So thank you so much for joining. And until next time, I'm Gary Michuda. Have a great couple of days. Bye-bye.